soul, body.
Not only disgusting, probably physically impossible, I would say.
You give up the business?
I'm going to towel myself off.
When Simon Callow and Stephen Fry visited Norwich, they offered their combined talents to help raise funds for the city's medieval cathedral. £10 million was needed to extend the historic library, build a new choir school, and enlarge the visitors' centre. This 900-year-old treasure was to be made relevant to the 21st century and beyond. £7 million had been raised in just 3 years, and Norwich's Theatre Royal was packed with cathedral supporters who wanted to hear what Callow and Fry had to say about life, art, and everything. As theatre director, my part was to ensure they reached the stage on time.
Simon and Stephen are shortly going to be pushed on stage for the first of the two halves of this evening's entertainment. Now, in the Theatre Royal's annual pantomime, the good fairy always enters and exits stage right. And the evil fairy always enters and exits stage left. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, mums and dads, Simon Callow and Stephen Fry.
My goodness. My lords, my ladies, my Lord Bishop. Stephen Fry, Simon Callow. We thought we'd begin this evening talking a bit about Norwich, and I thought I'd ask Simon, who is not, as I am, proudly a Norvicensian, to ask why someone who was educated in London and Northern Ireland should give up a valuable Sunday to come and support Norwich Cathedral.
Well, I'm a recent convert to Norwich because I've only very recently come here, and it literally, as I came from the station in the taxi and turned sort of twice or three times and suddenly found myself faced with St. Peter Mancroft and began to see the astonishing richness of architecture that there is in this city. And was fascinated to see that St. Peter Mancroft is absolutely next to the marketplace itself, and that all the street names seem to be celebrating markets of one sort or another. And I saw immediately Madder Market, instantly. One was almost in Shakespeare's world. And as I got to know the churches, the cathedrals, the extraordinary buildings, the byways, the back streets, the graveyards, and so on, I began to feel that somehow in this world was, in a way, this was the embodiment. Norwich itself was the embodiment of what we sort of mean by Western civilization. That's a rather general and an emotional analysis, to put it mildly, and for that I honour it, and would seek to do anything I could to maintain and support this great tradition.
Yes. Well, that's probably the highest doctrine of Norwich I've ever heard. I mean, fantastic, fantastic. I was going to say, because I like the mustard. I may have to think of something a little classier now. There's a famous quotation about Norwich, which is from Ben Jonson in, I think it's in Bartholomew Fair, isn't it, which would argue that maybe it is not just for you that Norwich typifies Western society, but even for those rather gruesome and chilling people who wish to see Western society defeated, it always did. There's a phrase, Sodom, Gomorrah, London and Norwich. And I've spent a long time looking for that aspect of Norwich. Not much luck. Though Burr Street can hum sometimes.
You were actually born where?
I was born in Norfolk's own Hampstead. So to my shame, I'll never be able to call myself a true Norfolk dumpling. But I moved here when I was 7. Not on my own. My parents actually came too. And they're still here, and I've had a place for the last 20 years almost, right, in Norfolk on my own. And I come back here whenever I can.
You went to school here?
North Walsham. Always gets a laugh in Norfolk. It's a bit like saying New Jersey in America, or Neasden. It is the Neasden of Norfolk, perhaps, North Walsham. It has its lovely spots, and it has the Paston School, an old grammar school. It was quite a long way from where I grew up. It's a little village called Booton, not really close to anywhere. Reefham is the nearest village, I suppose. And so it involved quite a collection of bus journeys to get from Booton to North Walsham, by way of a small town called Aylsham, which had a little cafe in the market where there was a pinball machine. And that became my solace of an idle hour, really. I just played pinball a lot instead of making the little further extra journey to North Walsham, and they grew a little tired of that. You see the downward slope of our hero, don't you? It's too terrible. How does Tennyson put it? Rose on the stepping stones of my dead self to higher things, and went to the Norwich City College by this time, which was the saviour. What about you? You went to school at a school you don't have much fondness for, didn't you?
Well, I went to an extraordinary variety of schools in the early days. I was born in South London, in Streatham, and then was transferred to the countryside when my mother became school secretary at a place called Goring-on-Thames. And first of all, I was a little shocked as a suburban
How old
child.
are you at this point?
5.
Oh.
A little shocked at the countryside, which was I mean, Streatham doesn't have a lot of countryside. But we, of course, were in the school. It was run by a chap with the wonderfully evil and warlike name of Roland Birch. For a headmaster, an admirable name. And indeed, he lived well up to his name. He was very fond of a flick of the tawse. And he had a mother who was ever present, a lovely, hirsute, fat old body. Roland Birch and his mother, as a sideline, had battery hens. And some mischievous person had gone in and opened all the doors of their little batteries cells, and I was accused of this crime. And there was a tremendous and very emotional scene.
It never leaves you. Injustice is the primary emotion the young feel.
Yes.
Smarting at injustice.
Yes.
It's the worst thing. Isn't it?
Exactly. I think in the end I was vindicated, but I did feel that wrong had been done.
And your life ever since has been a quest to prove
exactly
that you didn't.
To the world,
Yeah.
that I'm not an egg destroyer.
We have the master, Peter Wilson, has a bucket filled with questions from the audience. So enter Peter Wilson with, a bucket. How fantastic. How marvellous. Look at this. You take one.
All right.
And I shall take, we're taking them at random, so this could be very good. TS of row 14. Not only disgusting, probably physically impossible, I would say. Oh no, I misread it. I mean. This is a good question from someone called Tessa Skocilas, I'm sorry, from Norwich. How have you decided to follow one direction in life over another? I.e., how have you decided to do what is right for you in life to do? And I think we both have in common, amongst many things, is that we do enjoy writing as much as we do acting, and we enjoy acting in different media. And
what did you set out to do, Stephen?
I set out, actually, fun enough, I talked about, when I was at Cambridge, I wrote to the BBC, and I thought I would be absolutely at my happiest if I was given the job of being a continuity announcer. It's 2:02, and Pat is having a crisis with the yogurts. And then that's the Archers, and you'll be able to hear that edition at the same time tomorrow, or whatever, you know, all these things. That to me that was enough.
Right.
I really thought that was enough, and I hoped if I was able to get a job as a continuity announcer, that I might be able to write plays secretly in the evenings when I was off duty, and smuggle them to the drama commissioner of the BBC, and maybe get a part in them. But that was it. But I always knew I'd write. I think that was the writing is something you only need a pen and paper for, or a typewriter when I was young, or obviously a computer now. And acting is something you can't do on your own exactly.
Excuse me.
Well, but you still need stage managers, and you need an infrastructure and all the rest of it. Writing you don't. So writing is the sort of primal urge, I think. But is that what you find?
Absolutely. Like you, I above all wanted to write, but unlike you, I had absolutely no conviction in my ability to do so. I wrote, and I was appalled by what I wrote. I thought, I have nothing to say. This is absurd. And I'm saying it so boring. But I worked obsessively at it on that little Olympia typewriter that I had bought by selling all my LPs. That was how serious it was for me. And of course I realized all I had to write about was me, and there was nothing less interesting to the world at large than me. So I just put that aside and thought one day maybe I'll find a subject, and the odd irony of the thing was I became an actor and found my subject.
You've written, gosh knows how many books. How many? 5, 6, 7, 8 at least?
14.
Oh, good heavens.
You just haven't been keeping...
That's astonishing. I'm so sorry.
Some of them are quite small. But that's even less of an excuse for you not to have read them since...
No, quite. Exactly. They've been around. Damn, I'm so sorry. 14 books.
Yes. And only now do I think I'm on the brink of having the courage to actually invent something. I've only ever been able to write about existing matters, you know?
Yes.
Although I notice that my writing is aspiring more and more to the condition of fiction, which is a bit alarming if you're a biographer. You have to get a good check on that one, because you can start...
You've cunningly chosen dead people. Well, welcome back. I was thinking, when you were talking about Gielgud and great actors, firstly I thought, because that's the way my cheap mind goes, in a Sherin-like way, of anecdotes, and I did hear one. It somehow seems to me to sum up all that's brightest and best of England was an Edith Evans story. She bought a Renoir in the 1930s or 40s, when they was, even then, pretty expensive. And a friend went to have tea with her. Said, Edith, has your Renoir, has it come back from Christie's or some other place? She said, yes. She said, can I have a look? She said, it's over there. And very low down, it was a sort of winter afternoon tea, so there was not much natural light. And the guest had to go all the way down like this and lift up a curtain to look at it. And got some light on it. Said, Edith, it's absolutely gorgeous, but why did you hang it there? And she said, there was a hook. Anthony Hopkins has a story about Olivier, while we're on the subject, whom he famously understudied for some time, and Hopkins had to go to to a funeral. Someone, a grandmother or something, had died, and Olivier was running the company, and so he went. It was one afternoon after a matinee, and before an evening performance, he knocked on the master's door, and Olivier said, "Come in," and he said, "Larry, is it all right if I go to Wales for this funeral?" He said, "My dear boy, of course you must go." And so it was all arranged. He had the next day off whenever the funeral was. So he goes, collects his things, and he's just leaving the theatre to have tea before the... and he hears Olivier's voice in his dressing room going, "Of course you must go! Of course you must go! You must go, of course!" It's rather pleasing, isn't it? There's a story John Mills tells of Olivier, which I think is very extraordinary. John Mills was just about Olivier's best friend, and he gets a call, this is many years ago, saying, "Johnny, it's Larry, I want you to come, you know it's my opening night tonight, I want you to come backstage and see me." And he beetles off from Dedham to Waterloo Road, where Olivier's performing, and he knocks on his door and says, "Come in." He says, "Larry, what's the matter? What's the problem?" He says, "Johnny, I want you to know that what I'm about to do this evening is catastrophically terrible. I know it is, and I want you to tell my friends that I know it is, because I don't want them looking at me with sympathetic faces, not knowing how to tell me how dreadful what I'm about to do is. It is going to embarrass the hell out of you." And Johnny said, "All right, I'll tell everybody." And he went round saying, "Look, it's not going to be great. It's going to be ghastly. It's going to be the worst thing he's ever done, and he's very embarrassed. He just wants you to know that he knows that." So they all sit there nervously, and I'm going to stand up now just to warn the camera people. And he comes on back at the stage. There's a door. Opens it, comes up, and looks around. He closes the door. He comes up and he says, "Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by the summer sun of York." And of course the performance by which all his other performances are measured, Richard III, it was that first night.
Yes.
And Johnny said, the moment he put his face into the stage through the door, before he'd even crossed the threshold, everybody knew they were at one of the most magical evenings in the theatre they were ever likely to see. But the point is, he didn't know. Frank Finlay has a story similarly when he played with him in Othello. There was one particular evening where he was so astonishing. Not only did he get a very, very rousing standing ovation, which was quite common, which went on forever, but the whole company just lost it and just cheered him like that, and he stood there and he took it. Then when the curtain eventually came down, he stormed off, and they had him clattering down the stairs, slamming his dressing room door. They all looked at each other, and Frank Finlay was deputed to go down, and he knocked on the door. "Go away!" He said, "But, Larry, what's the matter?" "Go away!" He said, "Don't you know you were brilliant tonight?" "Of course I know I was brilliant. I don't know why!" It's fantastic, isn't it? But listen, now here's a question for you. Well, at least it doesn't say it is, but I know it is. It says, it's actually a wanted notice. Wanted. Has anybody found a long-lost comedy show, A Chance in a Million, last seen decades ago? Nick Overy of Great Yarmouth. Now, A Chance in a Million, starring Simon Callow, was 20 years ago, broadcast on Channel 4.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I don't know why this has happened, but it was a series which certainly has been seen by every taxi driver in London. Because they always challenge me as to why it's not been seen. And one of them said to me once, he said, we haven't seen a lot of you on the telly since that Chance in a Million, have we? So I said, well, I suppose not all that much. He said, "So what happened?"
Said, always a mark of failure, it's considered.
He said, "You give up the business?" "Or did it give you up?"
"No."
"A bit of both," I said.
No. It's very noble of you.
Taxi drivers and I have a very warm relationship.
Yes, I sometimes think, taxi driver, that I should have a series of cards to put up. So that just as they're driving along, their mouth opens, you can put up a card saying, "No, there probably won't be another Blackadder," and then put that one there. "Yes, they were damn good fun." And yes, I like that one too. What's your question?
It was for you, and are you going to read the new Harry Potter?
I am going to do it, yes, I'll be doing it in a week or so. HP5, as we insiders call it, which cracked the tiles of my porch the other morning. She's a bloody woman. I'm proud to say, on Thursday I'm doing a thing a bit like this with her, fun enough, at the Albert Hall.
The Albert Hall.
I did have once the worst experience I've ever had of tripping over words. Sometimes, if I'm kind of feeling good, I can go several pages without tripping up. Obviously, you don't have to start at the very beginning again. You get to go to the beginning of the sentence where you tripped up and re-record it. But so I can't remember what my record is, but I can get through quite a few pages. Then suddenly the words will start to swim in front of you. There was one phrase, 3 words. It took me, I swear to you, half an hour to get these 3 words out. Terribly simple, and I still can't say them, so I'm going to try and do it. It's Harry pocketed it. You see, I've done it again. Harry pocketed it. Harry pocket, and they went like this. Harry pocketed it. Oh, Jesus. Harry pocketed it. Just went on and on and on and on. I was thinking I was going to have to separate the three. You just go Harry, and sort of look at my watch and pocketed. And then it would be like one of those, Stephen Hawking voice machines. So I'm hoping she hasn't written that again. We've got time for. I don't know how we're doing for time, but I'm having fun at the moment. And obviously, just storm out when you're bored. That one.
We're on overtime now.
Yes, I think it's right saying that boredom, the word boredom, was invented by Charles Dickens, wasn't it? It was first use in the OED. Yeah.
Goodness.
And did you know the word gullible isn't in the OED?
Why not?
I do apologise.
I've had a bit more wisdom.
Well, indeed. It's been fantastic. What we're going to do now is go off and have a glass of water, and I'm going to towel myself down because it's very warm here. Or as I heard that Virginia Wade say when she was doing tennis commentary a couple of years ago, she said, yes, a lot of players keep a towel by the stop netting now so they can towel themselves off between points. So I'm off. I'm going to towel myself off. Thank you very much indeed.
In the second half of their fundraising performance for Norwich Cathedral, Simon Callow and Stephen Fry were in conversation on the stage of the city's Theatre Royal. Before the performance, the Bishop of Norwich, the Right Reverend Graham James, invited them to take afternoon tea. After the light-hearted reflections on their careers on the stage in the first half, Part 2 touched on more philosophical subjects at the end of a week in which homosexuality and the church had dominated the headlines. But first, it was my job as theatre director to remind the audience of the great cause they were supporting, before getting Simon and Stephen back on stage.
Well, we had the bucket filled with questions from... Oh, very good question here. Give me yours.
Yes, Pablo Barnett of Norwich. If you could have anyone from history for dinner and drinks, whom would you pick?
Winston Churchill chose Oscar Wilde when he was asked that question, which was surprised a lot of people who had expected him to say his ancestor, the Duke of Marlborough, or Wellington or Caesar or something.
Yes.
And obviously Wilde, I mean, it's an obvious answer, but it's obvious because there were few human beings who ever drew breath who had more to recommend them as dinner companions. There was one dinner table he was at where Lord Alfred Douglas was ranting about some young poet, younger than Douglas, who had just been published. And Wilde suddenly said the devil was walking one evening in the Libyan desert when he saw a monk being tormented by some junior imps. And he watched for a while, and he saw that this monk was holy and steadfast, was not being successfully tempted by these young devils. So he approached them and said, what is happening here? And they bowed low and they said, Master, for 39 days and 39 nights we have tried to turn this man of God away from his church, away from his Christ, away from his God. We have offered him power and principalities and delights of the flesh, but he has steadfastly refused to be tempted. The devil said, out of the way. He leant forward and whispered in this monk's ear, and the monk ripped the pectoral cross from around his neck, snapped it in twain, tore his holy garments, and shrieked and filled the air with imprecations and curses against his God and church. And the little imps and devils bowed down in front of Satan and said, truly you are the master. For 39 days and 39 nights we could get nothing from him. You just whisper in his ear and he turns his back against his church. What did you say? The devil says, it was very simple. I merely told him that his brother had been made Bishop of Alexandria. Anyone who can come up with that at a dinner party is surely number one on the list. Who would you have?
He did, of course, rehearse a little bit.
Indeed. There's a famous story of him saying goodbye to the...
Exactly.
You know that story? Yes. The train station.
Well, no, you tell it.
Well, there's a story. He went, in fact, to Cambridge, which was not his natural habitat, being an Oxford man, and saw some young undergraduates. They took him to the station to say goodbye. And he apparently he stood at the window and was giving marvellous anecdotes, terrific bon mots, wonderful. They were all delighted and giggling. An announcement was made. The train will be 10 minutes late, and Wilde looked rather ashen and stopped speaking. He'd rehearsed up until the moment. I refused to countenance.
But he also on his way round London, telling from having dinner in one place and joining them for port in another,
yes,
and then even the stories would slowly develop as the evening went on, till by the end he'd written them to a pitch of perfection, and the next day he'd write them down. Well,
this is just a little remark. You were talking about crying when reading Shakespeare, and a Kay Bion of Norwich, his or her stepmother had a saying which was about crying. Says when someone was emotional, their bladder was too near their eyes. So that was...
That's a Norwich saying.
Well, actually, I wish I could say it were. Apparently it's v Yorkshire, according to Kay Bion.
Many, many years ago, in a situation sort of like this, I was interviewing Dustin Hoffman at the National Film Theatre. And Dustin said that he was sharing a room with Robert Duvall all those years ago, in the 50s, early 50s, mid-50s. And Duvall had come into his room at 2 o'clock in the morning and woken him up and said, there's this guy, you gotta hear him. He's called John Gielgud. You gotta go and hear the guy. He's at the Y. He's doing something called the Ages of Man. You gotta go and hear him. And Dustin said, no, I don't want to hear him. I know what he's like. It's English acting. I don't want to hear it. And Duvall said, if you don't go, I'm going to smash your head against the wall. And so Dustin most reluctantly went to the Y, and he bought his ticket and he sat in the stalls. There aren't stalls. He sat in the rather hard seat in the Y. And Sir John came on and outpoured this torrent of sound and melody, and rhythm, and Dustin said that he sat there thinking, this is crap. I hate this. This is English acting. I don't want anything to do with it. It's not real. But as he was thinking these thoughts, he was aware of an unaccustomed sensation, which was of tears pouring down his face. And I've always been I honour him very much for telling that story. But also it hits a great truth, is that, in a sense, great poetry, great drama bypasses the intellect. The reality of theatre, as of any art, is that it isn't a reproduction of reality at all. It's an extension of it, it's a recreation of it, a reimagining of it, and its purpose is to reach you at a very, very deep level. And when people criticised John, and John Gielgud was occasionally guilty of indulging in sound for its own sake.
Yeah.
But once he stood on the stage of the Old Vic Theatre in one of those extraordinary evenings that one simply can hardly believe one's luck to have seen. It was called A Tribute to the lady in question being Lillian Bayliss. And on stage were John Gielgud and Peggy Ashcroft and Ralph Richardson and many other actors who'd appeared in that company. In the stalls were Michael Redgrave and Sybil Thorndike, that huge, great spirit at the age of 92, being wheeled in a wheelchair and swathed in white silk from head to foot, and turning round, knowing that, you know, people were aware that she was there, and turning round saying, "Hello, everybody!" And John Gielgud then came on stage, and he just tore into "What a rogue and peasant slave am I." It was as if Shakespeare was there in the room, that the initial impulse that had led Shakespeare to write those words was now flowing through John Gielgud, and it was absolutely overwhelming.
Now, what does your question
Mine
say?
says, it's from Diane Pickett of Beccles.
Oh, Suffolk, but we'll allow that.
Are we being geographist about this?
Oh, very much.
Yes. Okay. Stephen, would you like to act in a P.G. Wodehouse play or TV series again, like your role as Jeeves?
Well, I certainly wouldn't say I wouldn't like to. I enjoyed doing Jeeves and Wooster enormously. It was fantastic fun, and Wodehouse was one of my absolute passions when I was young. I wrote to him, and in fact, when we were recording the series, filming it around the place, I had his little photograph, which I still have, to Stephen Fry, all the best, P.G. Wodehouse, signed photograph. And he wrote me this wonderful letter on his old typewriter, on that very typewriter that had written the Jeeves stories and the Euclid stories and the Blanding stories and all those wonderful stories. I got this letter, which I was so proud of. I was about 14 or 15, I think, when I wrote to him.
That's another small point of contact between us, that I recorded all the Jeeves books.
You did, yeah.
On the cassette tape. And indeed...
Cassette tape?
Indeed. Let's be proper about this. That's what they're called.
You sound like a judge. What exactly is a Muppet? Sorry, you recorded...
What are Brahms?
Yes.
But and I must immodestly boast that I won a prize for it with the
Did you win a talkie?
What?
A talkie, that's what they're called.
I think they are called that,
yeah.
but the category was one that it's very hard to live up to, was Male Performer of the Year. I've struggled with that one.
Fantastic.
They're waving at us.
Are they already?
Yes.
I would just tell a couple of stories then on the basis of you reminded me of it. Where, Sybil Thorndike reminded me of the story someone told me about Lady Tree, a great old actress who was doing a charity evening at the Victoria Palace, and she appeared not swathed in white silk but in sort of crinolines and a ruched parasol and a large hat. She was to do her comedy sketch. She sat on the stool upstage and said, "Now, I want you to imagine that I'm a plumber's mate." So I think that's unquestionably the way acting should be, I think. Now, I have another question. I'm not sure I'm allowed. I didn't exactly promise the Bishop I wouldn't answer this, but it's Andrew and Stuart Rippon of Norwich who want to know our views on the appointment of Bishop John. I can speak around it while you're preparing your thoughts, if you like, which is that I wish to stay out of church politics because I just don't have the strength of mind to bear the insults and cruelty and viciousness that are thrown at people when they discuss things like episcopal appointments. It's much safer to be in an arena like military and warfare and things like that. It's a lot more comfortable. But I do find it personally. I've always had a rather Henry Crawford, the character in Mansfield Park view, that I've always fancied myself as a bishop, and I must say this in the presence of, I think you know. And if it were not for a cruel want of faith, I think I would make, make a damn good bishop. As people say, these days it may not get in the way. I do happen to think Rowan Williams is an excellent man from what I know of him. You know, obviously on the subject of biblical text and example as to why you can't do certain things with your body that you wish to. I find that absolutely absurd. I think I've always been extremely uncomfortable with the idea in any society that belief is based on revealed truth, that's to say on a text like a Bible or a Quran or whatever it is. It seems to me that the greatness of our culture, for all its incredible faults, is that we have grown up on the Greek ideal of discovering the truth, discovering by looking around us, by empirical experiment, by the combination of the experience of generations of ancestors who have contributed to our some knowledge of the way the world works and so on. And to have that snatched away and to be told what to think by a book, however great it may be in places. This is a book that says you can sell your daughter into slavery. It's a book that bans menstruating women from within miles of temples. The fact that it also says that for one man to lie with another is an abomination is no more made relevant or important than the fact that you can't eat shellfish. And if there is anything extraordinary about the figure of Christ, and there is, this is a man who said, you know, let him who is without sin cast the first stone, which is as great a thing as any human being has ever said. You know, it's one of the most remarkable phrases to come from human lips. And if there is anything, as I say, remarkable about that Christ figure, it is that you know he is not the man who would be casting stones under any circumstances whatsoever. That's my answer.
It's a curious thing, whenever the subject of homosexuality is raised in, for example, Parliament, or in the press, or in this sort of context, those of us who are gay feel a most peculiar sense of alienation, when suddenly I become an example, not personally, although sometimes that's true too, of a condition, an oddity, an abnormality. And there happen to be quite a number of people in England, in the world, for whom the very nature of my life is an abomination simply on principle. Yeah. And when I read about the debate over the Bishop of Reading, on the one hand, I'm sort of disappointed. I just think, oh really, are we still having this conversation at this stage in human history? Is this really still seriously being debated? And then on the other hand, I'm angry. And I think, I don't want to have anything to do with the people who believe these things. And nobody's actually saying, oh, lynch people at the moment. They're not saying kill them or castrate them, as they were saying only 30 years ago. Give them shock therapy, castrate them, lock them up. Now they're saying, okay, you're here and you're here to stay, but we won't have you in any prominent position. We won't allow you, above all, to be associated with the name of God. And that's just a source of deep melancholy to me. I would hope that any faith, any organization which was essentially dedicated to the idea of, which I think all religions would claim to be, essentially dedicated to the idea of nurturing the spiritual essence of human life, would wish to include all of human beings.
I think one of the things that newspapers, and let's face it, we might as well come out and say it if you don't mind swearing on the stage, the Daily Mail, which is the... they very easily whip up stories about how unlikable gay people are, how important this is or that is. Oddly enough, they are the flights of fancy. They're the things that, oddly enough, being newspapers, they're the things that are so rarely grounded. They are not connected with the person beaten up in the park because he looks camp, or the immigrant beaten up because they've got an Albanian voice who may actually have lived there for 40 years or whatever. It's these extraordinary hatreds. But I do find, on that subject, the Daily Mail is incredibly useful because you no longer need to know what to think. You just look at the Daily Mail, see what it's saying, and know that the opposite is always true. It's fantastically good, isn't it? We've got the sign saying three minutes here, so we've got time for a couple more questions. You're right. Oh, this is obviously directed to you, Richard Todd of Norwich. Does extreme intelligence result in happiness? Is ignorance bliss?
Ignorance, I'm sure, is bliss, isn't it? Don't you think?
Well, yes, to put that famous quotation in context, it's from Ode on a Distant Prospect of Eton Chapel by Thomas Gray, isn't it?
Yes.
Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise.
Yes.
Wisdom, I think. What do you think about wisdom? That's the chap to go for.
I do think so, but it's a very hard one.
Yeah.
And intelligence by no means necessarily guarantees wisdom.
No.
In fact, it can be the enemy of wisdom.
There are a lot of intelligent people who don't know which way to sit on a lavatory, let's be honest. Frankly, you wouldn't. It's not right that they're using the streets unsupervised. Do you remember the marvellously be-eyebrowed Ramsay, the Archbishop of Canterbury,
yes.
In the 60s? I remember him being interviewed by a BBC fellow saying, "Now, Your Grace, you have something of a reputation for being wise." "Oh, do I? Do I really? Am I wise? I wonder. I wonder if I'm wise. Am I wise? I wonder." And he said, "Well, Your Grace, what would you say wisdom is?" He said, "Wisdom. I wonder what wisdom. He said, I think it's the ability to cope." Isn't that a wonderful answer? I think it's so spot on. It's nothing to do with book learning. It's nothing to do with knowledge or understanding of the laws of the universe. It's nothing to do with necessarily political sophistication.
Yes, yes.
But it is an ability to cope. It seems to me it's the best answer I've ever heard.
Yes,
anyway.
yes. No, absolutely. I can see that. It seems to be some capacity to convert experience into knowledge.
And talking of wisdom, we've got time for. I don't know how we're doing for time, but I'm having fun at the moment. And obviously, just storm out when you're bored. Was it that one?
Well, I don't think we can actually ask the next question after that, Stephen.
Oh, dear.
What are your unswerving life philosophies?
One of my favourite sayings, corny as it is, was an old Don it's reported in most stories at Jesus College, Cambridge, so I like to think of someone like Sir Arthur Quiller Couch or someone like that. In the 1930s, was welcoming a young fellow to the common room or combination room, as they're called, and he said, "Welcome." He said, "Welcome. Very nice to have you here." He said, "A word of advice: don't try to be clever. We're all clever here. Only try to be kind, a little kind." I just think it's a wonderful thing. Kind is such a small word compared to virtue and mercy and justice and grace and all the capital letter words of the Victorians. But I think it's perhaps the strongest. It's the drip of water that really erodes the rock. Is kindness. I think kindness is it's not a philosophy exactly, but it's as good a lodestar to try to follow as any other. What do you think, sir?
Well,
Kindly answer quickly.
I just simply, wherever one can, whenever I can, I try to turn negative energy into positive energy, and it's extraordinarily easy in oneself and in relation to the outside world to allow energy to turn bad, as it were. And if one always just tries to convert something into something which is life-enhancing rather than life-suppressing, then I suppose one's done something worth doing.
Well, you always know wherever Simon is, if you're in a restaurant or in the corridors of the BBC, because you hear that. And that's as good a way to live your life. I think we have to be done. We have to let you all go, and we have to let ourselves go too, to some extent. Thank you all so much. We must say goodbye.